Most JRPGs tell stories about heroes destined to save their worlds, but Persona is different. It's not about grand destinies or chosen warriors. It's about you, your messy friendships, your awkward romances, and the quiet battles you fight inside your own head. Persona doesn't just create fantasy, it crafts reality, making every moment personal, relatable, and deeply human. So why does Persona connect in ways other JRPGs simply can't? Because Persona understands something essential. Sometimes the most epic journey is discovering who you really are. The majority of Persona isn't spent on lengthy dungeon grinds or messing around in menus. Instead, most of its frankly exhaustive runtime is spent on mundane slice-of-life content. Now, I'm someone who isn't particularly fond of these slower-paced games such as life and farming sims, but there's something engrossing about Persona's social elements because it has a unique contrast that its more straight-laced contemporaries lack. The duality between the mundane social link system and the extravagant dungeon delving, giving each of them a much greater impact, because the social links give a purpose to your combat. I'd argue that Persona 3 and 4 border on the edge of being a superhero game, while Persona 5 is outright the best superhero game ever made, because it's about characters who have secret identities and act as guardians of their world, protecting it from encroaching evils. And by spending most of your time building connections with the people around you, it gives you something worth protecting. By giving faces to the nameless masses who are largely removed from the main narrative, Persona is able to forge a community of citizens who are all under threat from whatever shadow threatens their city. This in turn gives more weight to the combat, as it gives your protagonist a goal beyond the standard saving the world motivation every protagonist has. It makes the stakes more personal, and Persona 3 even goes so far as to directly put your confidants in danger and tasks you with rescuing them. And speaking of making things more personal, a large part of Persona's success comes from its setting and thematic focuses. In traditional fantasy media, it can be difficult to build a connection with your audience, as to speak to the issues of the modern day, you'll have to create allegories that your average player might not pick up on. For example, Metaphor ReFantasio uses many of its tribes as parallels to racism, and while I'd imagine if you're watching a video like this, then the allegories are obvious, I think you'd be surprised just how oblivious more casual fans of entertainment are to metaphorical storytelling. However, Persona's modern-day setting gives it an advantage, as it's able to directly speak to its audience without any need for that imagery. In fact, Persona inverts that symbolism in its dungeons by taking the internal psychology of its characters and projecting them onto a fantastical setting through the shadow selves. And those psychological issues are far more relatable to modern-day and younger audiences, touching on unique themes like isolation, depression, societal pressure, and even sexuality. Where a grander RPG might explore the nature of morality, mortality, and humanity, Persona keeps its story street level as to build a more stable connection with its players and help them project themselves into the world. It's the same psychology behind why characters like Spider-Man and Batman are the core of their expansive universes, because they're the street-level heroes who ground the entire fiction in reality. Persona's characters resonate so powerfully not only because of their relatable issues, but because they grow and evolve so naturally. By confronting that darkness inside their hearts and accepting it as a part of themselves so they can move forward as imperfect vessels, which is a much healthier method than in other RPGs where the hero completely conquers the malevolence dwelling inside them until only the good remains. The beauty of Persona is how it truly explores moral ambiguity in both its heroes and its villains, with characters like Chidori and Maruki showing genuine conflict within themselves and framing both antagonists as moral grey points. In fact, none of these characters are the pinnacle of morality, except for Haru, who is an angel and could never do anything wrong, but best girl notwithstanding, every party member across these three games acts like the stupid teenagers they are. Whether it be Ryuji or Yosuke leaping before they look, Mitsuru or Makoto's naivete leading them to make errors in judgment, even Akihiko and Yusuke's blatant autism making them single-minded and socially awkward. None of them have any form of control over their lives and are just as lost in the real world as they are in the metaverse. Where other RPGs are about outward journeys of exploration across a mystical fantasy world, Persona keeps its journeys internal, having the problems find the protagonists rather than them going out in search of adventure. There's no wandering into a town and resolving the issues with the bandits or corrupt mayor. They defend themselves and their community from the twisted forces that would do it harm. By removing that sense of discovery and awe that comes with trekking across a fantasy world, Persona's big cinematic moments have to come from their characters and when they reach critical milestones in their lives, such as their awakenings. The games also never talk down to their audience, despite the fact they're written for young adults by middle-aged writers. The games are careful not to trivialize their issues, even being so bold as to deal with themes like suicide. But even problems of a lighter tone like Kanji's feminine side aren't played off as quirky jokes, but actual internal strife. I don't know much about the people who write these games, but I find it hard to imagine they dealt with the variety of psychological issues every character in this series has faced. Be it Yukiko inheriting her family's legacy, Yukari's complicated relationship with her mother, or Ann's hellish experience of being groomed. But the deft tone and understanding of which the writers portray these issues comes across as so genuine and personal that you'd swear they're speaking from experience. My evidence for this is how the games portray autism through Yusuke and Akihiko, and how, as an autistic myself, I have found myself acting exactly like these characters. For example, how single-minded and focused they are on their passions. I have a similar obsession with time and being as efficient as possible, so I can spend the most amount of time doing what I want. Like ordering groceries or Uber Eats instead of going to the supermarket, because despite costing more, I can never get back the time I spent shopping. I also feel a sense of kinship with Futaba, as I also live a reclusive life and tend to have unexpected quirks when interacting with strangers. And I'm sure many other players resonate with Makoto's obsession with achievement, Risei's obsession with perception, or Junpei's obsession with romance. It's the intimacy of the writing that allows every player to form an emotional attachment to one party member and forge a social link of their own. But that's just from the narrative and thematic side of the series, when the gameplay has just as much depth. Persona's dual gameplay of JRPG and visual novel is the key to its gargantuan runtime. 100 hours for the main story is an unrealistic expectation for any game, and that's also true for Persona. But Persona isn't a 100-hour game, it's two 50-hour games, at least mechanically. It's only by blending both of these genres together that Persona just barely manages to not outstay its welcome. If either component weren't present, then it wouldn't matter how stylish the combat or how emotionally resonant the characters were, the game would collapse under the weight of its own repetitive length. No one honestly wants to play 100 straight hours of a turn-based RPG or a visual novel, he lied, knowing damn well he'd read all of Umineko. However, in Persona's case, by constantly vacillating between two gameplay styles, it makes the progression feel far more rewarding, because both the social and combat aspects of the game turn into rewards for completing the other. Where other turn-based RPGs focus on grindy combat to reward you with elongated cutscenes, Persona gives as much control to the player as possible, letting them dictate when the gameplay ends and the story begins. Furthermore, it lets you select the stories you want to pursue, letting you craft your own narrative experience with the characters you find most intriguing. This system makes both sides of the game feel far more satisfying, as the meaningful shift in gameplay and the emphasis on choice in the story makes it feel like you're constantly making progress, which is essential in a JRPG series that's audaciously long even by JRPG standards. However, when you explain Persona to someone, they might rightfully think that the social elements sound boring and that they should just skip through it to get to the combat. What they fail to realize is that the visual novel-style gameplay of Persona is easily the better part of the game, and it's far more satisfying than the stylish battles. This is because the social link system preys on that numbers go up, gotta catch 'em all monkey part of the brain that live service games have monetized to hell. There's an immense joy in the tactile nature of progressing your social links as you build up towards the ultimate arcana at the end of that link. Thanks in large part to the sublime UI crafted specifically to scratch your subconscious with its sharp and unconventional appearance. One of Persona's most ingenious design decisions in this area is to obscure how long it will take you to rank up your social stats. I used to despise the social stat system as filler content made to pad the game's runtime to fit a calendar year, yet I've come to realize it's actually a secret slot machine, and every time you dedicate a slot to training them, you take a spin on the wheel just hoping to hit that jackpot, and when that final music note just inches out into a rank up, you get that mind-melting release my grandfather must have felt as he sat in the casino, finally allowing you to progress with whichever social link you were grinding to get, and continuing on with your completionist urge to max every confidant. But of course, Persona doesn't actually want you to max out every confidant, as the limited time system tries to ensure you're always missing a couple of ranks. And that time system is what ties the game together, making both combat and confidants feel impactful. This system says more about who you are as a person than any binary choice in an RPG ever could, because it's not testing your morality or what it is you believe, but what it is you care about. We all have the same amount of hours in a day. Some of us spend that time endlessly grinding to rise the societal ladder, others waste it away by endlessly scrolling social media for hours. I spend my time working as efficiently as possible to do work that I'm proud of, so I can maximize spending as much time doing what I want as possible. This is reflected in my playthroughs of Persona, where I always try and complete the dungeon within a single day, so I can spend as much time as possible progressing my social links. And this is true for every player. Whether they savor the combat by spending their free days exploring Tartarus, or whittling away at their social stats to get a head start on the social link requirements, Persona gives all of us the same amount of time, and at the end of the year, we can look back and see if we used our time wisely. How many people did we help? How powerful did we grow? This is how Persona defines who you are as a person, by telling you that you can't do everything and then forcing you to choose how to spend your life. It's one of the most personal and revealing games I've ever played that speaks to me and my generation in a way that I didn't think video games could achieve. I have many more Persona essays that go in depth on some of the things I've mentioned in this essay, so click on them if you're interested and consider subscribing.